Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order and extend to everyone a warm welcome. Bienvenue à tous. This meeting is called pursuant to
everyone.
Deal with the all chapters of the report of the Auditor General of Canada, which was tabled yesterday, November 3rd. And the committee is very pleased to have before today, of course, the Auditor General, Sheila Fraser. She's accompanied by Scott Vaughan, Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, Richard Flagiol, Assistant Auditor General, and Wendy Lachiak, also the Assistant Auditor General. So again, welcome to all the witnesses. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Ms. Fraser, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are very pleased to present our 2009 fall report, which was tabled yesterday in the House of Commons. As you mentioned, I'm accompanied by Scott Vaughan, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, Wendy Loshak and Richard Flagiol, Assistant Auditors General. The issues covered in this report are typical of the challenges facing government today. Our findings underscore the importance of thinking through the implementation challenges when policies and programs are developed or changed. Having a complete picture of what needs to be done, by whom, how other programs will be affected, and what risks are involved can make the difference between a program that delivers results for Canadians and one that does not. Program evaluations can be a valuable source of information for decisions to change, improve, or replace programs. The departments we audited said they are concerned about whether they can meet expanded requirements under the 2009 policy. In the departments we examined, evaluations covered only a relatively low proportion of total program spending. In addition, inadequate data limited the assessment of program effectiveness. Despite 4 decades of efforts, evaluations are still not providing enough reliable evidence about whether program objectives are being met. Chapter 2 of our report looks at how foreign workers are selected for admission into Canada. Citizenship and Immigration Canada has to design and deliver foreign worker programs that meet the needs of the labour market. Nous avons constaté que le ministère a pris depuis quelques
We found that the department has made a number of key decisions in recent years without properly assessing their costs and benefits, potential risks, and likely impact on other programs. Some of these decisions have caused a significant shift in the types of foreign workers being admitted permanently to Canada. There is little evidence that this shift is part of any well-defined strategy to best meet the needs of the Canadian labour market. We also found that when work permits are issued for temporary foreign workers, there is no systematic review to ensure that job offers are genuine and that employers have complied with previous permit terms and conditions, such as wages and accommodations. The problems we noted could leave temporary foreign workers in a vulnerable position and pose significant risks to the integrity of the immigration program as a whole. Citizenship and Immigration Canada needs to develop a clear vision of what each program is expected to contribute to Canada's overall objectives for immigration. Let's turn now to the chapter on tax legislation. The Income Tax Act is one of the longest and most complex pieces of federal legislation. Taxpayers have the right to expect clear guidance on how to interpret the Act so that they can determine how much income tax they owe. Problems arise when the wording of the Act is unclear or does not adequately reflect government policy. There is now a backlog of more than 400 technical amendments that are needed. It has been 8 years since Parliament passed a technical bill to amend the Income Tax Act.
Those technical changes become law. Taxpayers do not know the exact form the change will take, when it will apply, and how it will affect the tax transactions they have already completed. The Department of Finance needs to do more to bring the urgency of the problem to the attention of the government and Parliament, and it ought to review the way it manages this process. We also have a chapter on electronic health records. Canada Health Infoway, Inc. was created in 2001 as a not-for-profit corporation to lead the development and implementation of electronic health records across Canada. Infoway has accomplished a great deal in 8 years. It identified the key requirements and components of electronic health record systems and developed a blueprint for their design. It also ensured that projects put forth by the provinces and territories were designed to comply with its blueprint and standards for compatibility. Infoway has made a considerable effort to report on progress, but the meaning of some figures it reports is not clear. For instance, it reports that 17% of Canadians live in provinces or territories where a complete electronic health record system is available. However, having a system available does not necessarily mean that healthcare professionals are actually using it. This is a highly complex initiative. Meeting the significant challenges that lie ahead will take the collaboration of Infoway, all provinces and territories, and other stakeholders. Mon rapport rend compte également du processus.
My report today also looks at how National Defence purchased vehicles that were urgently needed to protect Canadian forces in Afghanistan. National Defence and Public Works and Government Services Canada worked together to fast-track the purchase of these vehicles. In 3 of the 4 projects we looked at, National Defence has determined that the vehicles have met operational needs. The 4th project is nearly 2 years behind schedule and is projected to cost at least double the amount originally approved by the government. National Defence needs to develop a process geared to managing urgent acquisitions. It should also examine whether there are lessons from these projects that can be applied to its regular acquisitions. We also examined how Indian and Northern Affairs Canada and Environment Canada have carried out the federal government's responsibilities for land management and environmental protection on reserve lands. There are few federal regulations that apply to environmental protection on reserves, and the federal government has taken little action to change this. As a result, people living on reserves have significantly less protection from environmental threats than other communities.
Landfills on reserves operate without permits, monitoring, or enforcement by Indian and Northern Affairs, as do sewage treatment and disposal. We also found that despite the Department's commitment to transfer more control to First Nations over the management of their lands and resources, access to land management programs and training is limited. A healthy environment and control over the management of lands and resources are critical to sustainable economic development. Without them, opportunities for First Nations to improve their quality of life and approach the standard of health and well-being enjoyed in other communities are severely restricted. Turning to emergency management, the government must be ready to respond quickly and effectively when emergencies arise. Canada needs to have a planned and coordinated approach in place so that federal, provincial, and municipal agencies know what part they will play in managing a crisis. Public Safety Canada was created to coordinate the federal government's response to large-scale emergencies. It has developed an interim federal emergency response plan to coordinate activities in an emergency, but we found that the plan has not been formally endorsed by government. Until it is adopted, it will be difficult for Public Safety Canada to fulfill its assigned role. Tant qu'il ne serait pas clairement établi.
Until it is clearly established how Public Safety Canada will work with other departments, it will be difficult for it to truly coordinate the federal response to emergency situations. The last chapter of the report examines how the Canadian International Development Agency is implementing its commitments to key principles of aid effectiveness. Donor partners and recipient countries told us that CEDA staff in the field are highly regarded and their efforts are appreciated. However, the complex and lengthy processes required to obtain approval for project funding have long been criticized within and outside the agency. We also found that the agency has failed to concentrate on fewer priorities, despite a commitment to narrow its focus. Donor partners, recipient governments, and program staff are unclear about the agency's direction and long-term commitment. The nature of international development calls for stable, long-term programming, and CEDA needs a comprehensive plan for going forward.
To answer any questions that the committee may have, but I would first propose that the Commissioner present his findings to the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Mr. Vaughan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mon rapport
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My report examines a number of areas critical to effective environmental management, starting with the importance of solid information.
is at the heart of sound policymaking. The federal government needs science-based environmental information that is timely, robust, and accessible in ways that both identify patterns of environmental degradation and help programs concentrate on the most urgent environmental problems. Until data programs are woven together to track major changes over time in the quality of Canada's environment, we are left with piecemeal approaches to protecting the environment. The importance of good information is clear in our chapter on applying the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. More than 100 federal organizations are required to apply the Act to projects that could impact the environment. Assessing the possible effects of projects early in the planning phase is a cornerstone of good environmental management. Identifying potential impacts, such as pollution or habitat destruction, before they occur allows for corrective action to avoid or reduce environmental problems. Dans la moitié des dossiers que nous avons examinés,
In half the files we examined, the rationale or analysis was too weak to demonstrate if environmental effects of projects had been considered appropriately and whether actions were taken to mitigate them. The Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, which administers the Act, has not established a quality assurance program for assessments, although the Act requires it to do so. Roughly 80,000 environmental assessments have been initiated since 1995. Yet, because it lacks a quality assurance program, the agency does not know how good the assessments have been and whether they have contributed to environmental protection.
at the risk that certain toxic substances pose to the environment and human health. We note a number of significant control and monitoring systems to reduce toxic emissions and check levels of exposure among Canadians. We also note the need for improvements in how risks are managed. Lead and mercury, for example, continue to present risks. New research indicates that exposures to lead at levels currently considered safe may, in fact, be too high, underscoring the need for an overall risk management strategy. Le gouvernement doit absolument faire le point.
It is critical that the government take stock of how well its actions are working and also consider new research and the results of monitoring in order to protect human health and the environment from the risks of toxic substances. Current product labeling does not fully disclose the chronic risks posed by toxic substances in some common household products. As a result, Canadians are not fully informed about these risks and thus may not be taking appropriate precautions to protect themselves. The third chapter in my report looks at the National Pollutant Release Inventory. Created in 1992, the NPRI provides Canadians with information about key pollutants in their communities. The NPRI is important because it helps to track releases and transfers of substances that can have a negative effect on the environment and on the health of Canadians.
Inventory users with enough information to help them understand what data can be used for and where caution should be applied. Environment Canada has taken measures to improve NPRI data quality. However, these actions must be guided by an overall strategy and plan to improve data accuracy so that pollution tracking and environmental monitoring can rely on the best possible information. Finally, Mr. Chair, the fourth chapter is my annual report on environmental petitions. We received 28 petitions this year. The issues most commonly raised include health, biodiversity, fish habitat, and environmental assessments. Mr. Chair, we would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vaughan, and thank you for your, both you and Ms. Fraser, for the report and the work that your department does. I'm going to interrupt normal proceedings right here now just to deal with a motion that, just to clear the record here before I forget, and that is the steering committee had a very brief meeting before this meeting, and we have selected 4 chapters for study by this committee. I'm just going to read the motion and moved that the committee hold hearings on the following chapters from the fall 2009 report of the Auditor General of Canada, and those 4 are Emergency Management, Public Safety Canada, Chapter 7, Chapter 8, Strengthening Aid Effectiveness Canada, Canadian International Development Agency, Chapter 1, Evaluating the Effectiveness of Programs, and Chapter 5, Acquiring Military Vehicles for Use in Afghanistan. Of course, we may be doing other chapters, but of course the steering committee and this committee can revisit that after the break. But that is the motion, so moved by Mr. Christopherson. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carried. Okay, we're going to go to the first round, 7 minutes each. Ms. Crombie, you have 7 minutes.
Madam Fraser, Mr. Vaughan, thank you very much for attending today. And Madam Fraser, I want to thank you for your very thorough analysis. I paid particular attention to your matters of special importance and just was very concerning when you said despite good intentions, commitments are made without full analysis of risks involved, no long-term vision or strategy to guide a department's overall programming, no ongoing evaluation of program effectiveness, fragmented approach to programming, in response to problems of the day, creating problems that weren't anticipated. These are all very concerning indeed. I'm going to limit my questions to 2 chapters right now, starting with Chapter 7 on emergency preparedness and public safety, and then I'm going to move on to selecting foreign workers if I have time. I hope to. So just to get right into it, because time is limited, in your report, it's very damning. So in your opinion, I'd like to know, did the federal government have a plan to cope with a national emergency such as this H1N1 pandemic?
As we note in the report, there is a draft federal emergency response plan which would deal with national emergencies. That plan has not been formally approved by government. We believe it is important that it be approved so that roles and responsibilities...
Point of order, Ms. Fraser. Point of order, Mr. Weston.
Well, maybe I'm confused, but I don't think that the H1N1 investigation is part of our emergency preparedness plan. It's part of a pandemic plan, which is a separate thing entirely. And
that's not a point of order. We'll let the auditor answer that.
Well, the auditor reviewed that. It's not
Mr.
part of
Weston, we will let the auditor continue. If it's not, she will tell the committee that, and you can have your 7 minutes and you can ask similar questions. Go ahead, Mr. Fraser.
Mr. Chair, I think that's a partisan role that you're taking, and I'm not. I would challenge the chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Fraser.
Order, please.
As I mentioned, the Federal Emergency Response Plan has not been approved. We believe it is important that it be improved so the roles and responsibility of Public Safety Canada would be clear to provide leadership and coordination. As for the H1N1 situation, we did not look at that because obviously much of the events of the past few weeks have occurred after our audit was complete. But it is my understanding that it has not been declared a national emergency, and the Federal Emergency Response Plan would not apply to this situation. It is being managed by the Public Health Agency and Health Canada under their pandemic plan.
Thank you, Madam Fraser. Why hasn't an effective federal plan been approved?
Excuse me?
Why hasn't a federal plan been approved?
I have no idea. You would have to ask the department.
In your opinion, has the government exercised leadership necessary to coordinate emergency activities, as you say in your report, or provided governments with sufficient guidance on what is needed in the event of emergencies?
In the audit, we mentioned that we looked at assessments that had been done for 6 emergencies over the past 3 years. The government itself concluded that the coordination was not as effective or as efficient as it should have been. And we believe that part of the solution to that is the approval of the Federal Emergency Response Plan so that Public Safety Canada, in a way, has the authority to be able to exercise the role that has been given to it under legislation.
Madam Fraser, who is ultimately responsible and what is the role of the minister here?
Under our system, the minister would be ultimately responsible for the operations and activities of his department.
Okay. Would you agree that, given that you've said there's been a lack of leadership and guidance to coordinate emergency response because this national plan has not been approved, could this explain why in certain emergencies situations, like as, for example, the national H1N1 pandemic, which could become a national emergency. And so could this explain why the reaction to this has been so slow and chaotic and confusing, resulting in the lack of delivery of vaccine and shortages?
Chair, I really can't respond to the H1N1 situation. We have not looked at this. And much of it, of course, the whole vaccination program is provincial responsibility over which we would not be able to do any work anyways.
Okay, I'm going to move on just briefly to Chapter 2, Selecting Foreign Workers under the Immigration Program. Under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, what is being done to curb abuses in the system for both employers and workers? Against both employers and workers?
We noted two issues in our audit as regards temporary foreign workers. One is the fact that there is no assessment of the genuineness of job offers. There are labor market opinions that are done, but that is more the effect of having a foreign worker take a position rather than assessing whether that job is in fact valid. The second issue is that there are very often conditions placed upon employers, items such as salary or lodging. There is no follow-up done to ensure that these conditions are being respected. Now, I do understand that government has recently introduced proposals to amend the regulations that would address, I think in large part, the issues that we raise in this audit.
Who would be responsible for assessing whether job offers are bona fide for the temporary workers?
It is a responsibility of Citizenship and Immigration Canada.
Do you think it's possible that work permits for foreign workers are issued for jobs that don't exist? And how could this be stopped?
I think there is a risk. There is always a possibility that there are work permits issued for jobs that are not authentic. And that there certainly needs to be, I think, a much clearer guidance given. We noted in the report that there was a fair bit of confusion about whose responsibility this actually was. There needs to be clear direction given to Citizenship and Immigration that they assess and HRSD as well, as Human Resources and Skills Development Canada,
right.
That they work out between themselves who will do this work, and that they actually assess if the job appears to be valid.
Is there a follow-up of employers to ensure that they've complied with their terms and conditions?
At this point, certainly at the time we did the audit, there was no follow-up. But as I mentioned, there is proposed new regulations that would address that issue.
In your opinion, with the temporary foreign worker program, could it be abused by Canadian employers who instead would use it as a ruse to bring in relatives for bypassing family reunification rules?
That is certainly a possibility, given the very long delays that there are under family reunification programs. People may attempt to bypass that and bring in family members under other programs.
Is there a strategy currently to address the backlog of, well, you note 600,000, we've heard 800,000 applicants. Is that being addressed?
Government introduced changes to the job categories under which people can be admitted into the country, reducing them from over 300 to 38. That is fairly recent. There was an expectation that that would reduce the number of applicants. We note in the report that there is a backlog of applications prior to the introduction of these new categories has been reduced, but there is a backlog, if you will, that has been created under the new system. So there are currently close to 600,000 applications in total in the backlog. Government expects that they will be able to deal with, under the new system, with applications within between 6 and 12 months. We have strongly encouraged government to track that because initial indications would seem to indicate that the number of applications are still very high and very few are actually being refused. So there needs to be quite rigorous tracking done to ensure that there isn't just another backlog being created, and if necessary, other measures be taken.
Thank you, Ms. Crombie. Madame Pai, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
7 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Fraser, for your report. According to the tone of this report, it would appear that you express concerns with regard to how the department evaluates programs. Some of those are in Chapter 1. There, you say that 17 of the programs had insufficient results. And you also know that there were major funds invested in computer systems. Is this a lack of balance between the needs defined in the system and the way that the programs are designed? Could that be signs of slippage, or are there groups in the department who develop programs and do not work together with the technology people to define the needs and collect the appropriate data? You also concluded in Chapter 1 that the departments you audited, of those departments, many of them fear that they don't have the capacity required to deliver the programs directly as stipulated in the law, in the Act. Now, do all departments share this fear? The program is also, there was the issue of direct program spending. Could you explain the government's rationale and your appraisal of the measures taken by the government to reduce these practices? Now, those are my questions for Chapter 1. I also have questions with regard to the Canada Revenue Agency. So with regard to the CRA, there's a considerable number of technical amendments that are required, and there hasn't been a technical bill tabled since 2001. Could you tell us why the department hasn't tabled such a bill? And you also raised a concrete example that affects non-competition agreements. For example, the CRA's delay deprives us of major tax income, and that opens the door to abuses. So you also indicated that the Department of Finance had said that it would amend its act for businesses that have signed non-competition agreements. I'm thinking, for example, of the case of Mr. Black. This change and the 150 other amendments have not yet been made. So at this pace, numerous files will not be reviewed if we look at the delays that are involved at CRA. And the government will not be able to recover the amounts of money. So are there any other examples? Because I came across this file because the amounts of money involved are considerable. But I'm also wondering whether whether corporations' dormant accounts that we find at CRA, and that they've called them dormant accounts, and those amounts are simply waiting with CRA and they haven't been recovered. Does that include technical measures such as this one? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Concerning Chapter 1, we have noted that the problem of complete and pertinent data has existed for a very long time. We did not seek to understand whether it was because of information technologies, because obviously technologies can be used to obtain this information, but I think that fundamentally it's a problem of clearly defining the performance indexes and the data required, and then of putting in place the proper systems. You must also understand that for many of the programs, it can be difficult to assess the impact with specific figures because sometimes they are qualitative evaluations. But I think that objectives must be better identified, the performance indicators must be better defined, and we must ensure that this information can be obtained. But this problem has existed for a very long time. What raises a challenge with complying with this new policy is that as of 2013, all direct spending programs must be evaluated over a 5-year period. The department also noted a problem with capacity. There is a lack of experienced auditors, and we also pointed out in the report that there are no standards or guidelines that Treasury Board Secretariat can follow to help the departments in this area. And perhaps I can draw a parallel with the internal audit, which noted that internal audit services needed to be made more professional. And I think perhaps we can draw a parallel with the evaluation services because we have seen progress with regard to internal audit services. So in the next few years, the government will have to tackle this. With regard to subcontractors, I think this is just a question of resources, capacity, and knowledge. Your concern with regard to subcontracting, is that your major concern? Yes, it's because this knowledge and expertise is not looked at when these people are hired by the departments. These people can carry out, they can put in expert opinions that are very selective, but people need to be trained in-house, and that doesn't come under the department. Concerning Chapter 3, we have a table, 3.2, which shows the timeline of an act that was sought to be adopted as of 2002, and then because of the elections and prorogations and other, we are now in 2008, and it still hasn't been passed. So there are several reasons, but in the past, the government has always sought to introduce a technical bill to address these questions. As you said, it's been 8 years since such a bill has been introduced, so this can create confusion, and it also prevents CRA from going back and re-auditing some of the taxpayers. So we feel that it is important that this clarification be made and that these technical amendments also be made to the Income Tax Act. Thank you, Ms. Fye.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you all again. Same old gang. That includes us. I'd like to begin with Chapter 8, Strengthening Aid Effectiveness, Canadian International Development Agency, CIDA. I know from personal experience that many countries around the world, particularly in Africa, CIDA is the face of Canada, and where CIDA succeeds, Canada is appreciated and recognized. Where it fails, the whole country pays the price in terms of the perspective. And you stated in your opening remarks today, and I'm quoting, donor partners, recipient governments, and program staff are unclear about the agency's direction and long-term commitment. I'd also like to turn to page 6 of your chapter. Paragraph 8.7, last half, says on 23rd February 2009, the agency formally announced with cabinet approval its intention to focus its aid on 20 countries. Now, I'm hoping you can help me here. I'm active on the Canada-Africa Parliamentary Association, and we recently had an unprecedented meeting with 10, 12 ambassadors. It's not very often you get a dozen ambassadors in one room with one message, and their message was Canada's shift from Africa being a priority to other parts of the world. And I'm certainly not going to get into what that evaluation is, but they came to us, and their main argument was that given the close relationship that Canada has had with Africa and all its 54 component countries, they've seen us as one of their strongest friends, one of their best friends, one of those that they can rely on no matter what. And their main message to us was, as a result of a shift in priorities, leaving them out in the cold, and they said, we don't understand why it seems like you're throwing your old friends overboard to make new friends. So we had a follow-up meeting with CETA to find out what's going on and why. It wasn't a very good meeting. And I have to say, your chapter helps me understand why we had so much trouble. We've had a follow-up meeting to that, and at one point we finally got down that there was some kind of analysis supposedly done about the various countries, the effectiveness of the money, the exact things you're talking about that isn't happening, that kind of evaluation. And what's interesting is that we were told, and these were bureaucrats, so they were doing as much as they could do and no more. But their response was, we can't give you any of that information because it's contained in advice to the minister. So by virtue of wrapping it in advice to minister, it's out of bounds for us, possibly out of bounds for you. I'd leave that to you. Anyway, my question is, the lack of focus and analysis that you have found, could that apply to this whole issue of the refocus that's taking place, and that much of the analysis that we would expect has been done and that we're told is done is maybe not as thorough and therefore not as easy to defend as we're led to believe?
Chair, I would just respond by saying that the focus, be it either priority areas or the countries of focus, are really decisions of policy. Those would not be areas that we would challenge. We would accept that as policy and then see how that's being implemented. What we note in the report, though, is that to do international development are often very long-term projects. It takes a while before you see results. There have been, as we note in the report in Exhibit 8.4, a number of different focus priority areas. There have been a lot of changes. So it has created, I think, a certain confusion both within the agency and outside the agency as to where the focus really is. Government as well agreed with the principle that they needed to reduce the number of focus areas, reduce the numbers of countries to be more effective. Came up with a list of 20 countries. They are currently still have projects in at least 60 countries. So we do not see the narrowing of focus that has been agreed to as being essential for effectiveness. And I would just say as well, there were planning documents by country as to what CETA would do, what was expected. All of those planning documents have expired, and we are told there are other documents in process, but they have not been approved and communicated more broadly as to what the objectives are.
Before I move on to my next chapter, it was just in reading your report in terms of some of that analysis and the country analysis that led me to believe that, I mean, when you're being denied information that seems fairly reasonable, what was the evaluation? Not the advice to the minister. Fair enough, that's out of bounds. Advice that came to me at the time, okay, cool. But when I read your report, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's because the information isn't there. Maybe the analysis isn't being done. If they're not doing updated country-by-country analysis, then how can you determine whether a continuation of X million of dollars is going to give you what you need or not, and therefore justify a shift to another country or another part of the world? But we're going to call them in on that one, and we'll do some follow-up there. The next one I'd like to, as time permits, is Chapter 6, Land Management and Environmental Protection on Reserves. Very disturbing to read this. Almost every time we touch this file, it's disturbing. If I can quote you from today, you said, we found that most landfills on reserves operate without permits, monitoring, or enforcement by Indian and Northern Affairs, as do sewage treatment and disposal. And we also found that despite the Department's commitment to transfer more control to First Nations over the management of their land issues and resources, access to land management programs and training is limited. Now, in your report under the conclusions, page 27, paragraph 6.93, INAC and Environment Canada have not addressed significant gaps in the regulatory framework that protects reserve lands from environmental threats. Provincial municipal environmental regulations and zoning laws that protect communities off reserves do not apply to reserve lands. Page 16, paragraph 6 point, I guess before 9. Again, quoting, it has, meaning the government, it has power and authority under the Indian Act, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 1999, and the Fisheries Act. Next paragraph says, 1996, the parties signed the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management and identified 4 environmental threats. In a 2007 study, Environment Canada also identified significant threats on reserves that required priority attention, landfill, solid waste, hazardous waste. I mean, this is going to come as a shock to a lot of Canadians that the federal government's responsible for all these environmental protections at a time when environment is arguably the 1 or 2 biggest issue facing us immediately right now. And I'm trying to get a sense of why this has been, and I know you can't answer a why. That's what I really want to know is why, but I can only go so far from getting information from you. How serious is the abdication of responsible regulation in this area? Is it as bad as it seems? In other words, are there landfill sites, water treatment, exposures into the air that would never be allowed anywhere else in Canada but are happening there?
Chair, we have not identified specific cases, but I think we have to say that the risk is certainly there. The department has the responsibility to provide licenses for landfill sites. As we note in the report, there are a very, very small number that have been issued. So there is no assurance that those sites are not situated next to water sources or others. Or we talk about septic systems. There is absolutely no regulation for septic systems. So there is a very significant gap in the fact that provincial and municipal regulations do not apply on reserve, and the federal government has not addressed that gap. It is, I think, interesting to note in the report that as we did our audit, the departments were quite clear with us that there was a question of funding. And I think that should the committee ever decide to hold a hearing on this, that is certainly an issue to explore with them, because that came up as a reason quite frequently and is actually within our report that they commented about their difficulty in meeting all of their requirements because of a lack of funding.
Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Mr. Saxton, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd first of all like to welcome the Auditor General back, the Environment Commissioner as well. Welcome back, and other witnesses. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to begin with Chapter 1, Evaluating the Effectiveness of Programs. And in that chapter, the Auditor General states, Environment Canada has processes in place to identify needed improvements. Could you kindly let us know what those processes are? Just explain what those processes are. It's on page 10.
I may have to ask Mr. Maxwell, if he's here, to join us at the table, Chair.
Did you hear the question?
Thank you, Chair.
Being joined by Mr. Neil Maxwell, Assistant Auditor General.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, of the 6 departments, there was one of the 6 that we found had reasonable practices to identify where things needed to be improved in terms of the functioning of the evaluation function. In that instance, the sorts of practices we saw, and we thought these were quite useful ones that could guide the improvements in other departments, included surveys, for example, that they do of users after the evaluation is completed, so they determine whether the evaluation in fact met needs or not. Several others I could elaborate on, should you wish.
Okay, thank you. Now, since forming government, we've put many new processes in place to ensure that we never again see the waste and mismanagement that occurred under the previous government. And these include the Federal Accountability Act, the Policy on Management Resources and Result Structures, and the Policy on Evaluation. I just want to ask if your report, Madam Auditor General, covered any of these new processes.
We only looked at the program evaluation policy, took it into account in this audit of program effectiveness, and the difficulty departments are saying that they may have in meeting the requirements of that policy.
Okay, I also noticed that the management accountability framework, which has been strengthened by the Treasury Board, was not covered either. Can you explain why that wasn't covered?
Simply wasn't part of the scope of this audit, and has not been, we have not decided to do an audit on that particular framework.
Okay. You mentioned in your report the Center of Excellence. Can you tell the committee what the Center is about?
The Centre is really a part of the Treasury Board Secretariat, which should be providing guidance, expertise to the evaluation function across government. We note a number of areas where we think they need to improve their practices. I can perhaps ask Mr. Maxwell to elaborate upon that, Chair.
Yes, certainly. We found that the center had been monitoring developments in the evaluation community among federal departments. Our main concern there was that many of the initiatives that they had started, they didn't continue through to complete.
Okay. In Chapter 2, selecting foreign workers under the immigration program, it states that CIC followed a sound decision-making process in 2008 to design the Canadian Experience class. Can you explain what that process was?
Chair, I'll ask Mr. Flagel to respond to that.
Mr. Chair, we're really citing this one as a good example of how programming decisions should be really supported. They did a very good analysis of the cost of that program, of the benefits, of the risk involved, of the type of impact it can have on other streams within the immigration program. So I think on that one we were quite satisfied about the way the department did their policy analysis on this one. Okay.
Also, Chapter 2, Immigration. Less than a year into the action plan for faster immigration, which included $109 million over 5 years, the skilled worker backlog has fallen by 30%, and new applicants are arriving faster. This is a step in the right direction. Can you comment on the administration measures that CIC has taken to reduce the inventory of applications?
Yes, Chair. As was mentioned earlier, the number of job categories under which a skilled worker could come into the country has been reduced from over 300 to 38. This was introduced in November of 08, retroactive to February of 08. So what effectively happened was that there is what we call a pre-February 08 inventory. All of the applications from February 08 were put into a new process. There was no processing of the applications between February 08 and December 08. So the only processing was on the previous system. So of course those numbers went down from about 600 to about 450. But meanwhile, under the new system, all the applications were put in abeyance. So there has been an overall reduction of inventory of applications, old and new, of about 5%.
Okay. That was my time, Mr. Chair.
1 minute.
Okay, I'd just like to ask a question regarding Chapter 5, which is the delivery of vehicles. Your audit found that the vehicles delivered to Afghanistan and the National Defense has determined that they have met operational needs. I think most of our armed forces members are appreciative to have new vehicles, and we stand behind them. Can you comment on what would have happened if these vehicles would have been delayed?
I really can't comment on that, Chair. Obviously, the National Defense indicated that these were urgent purchases that were required to protect the armed forces in Afghanistan. We looked at 4 acquisitions. In 3 of them, National Defense and Public Works worked to get the vehicles there quickly. There is one project, though, that was 2 years behind schedule, and I believe is just starting to be delivered to Afghanistan now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saxton. We can now start the second round. I think we can go 6 minutes. Mr. Lee, 6 minutes.
Thank you. Can I just continue on that line on the military vehicle acquisition? These were land vehicles, were they? These weren't airside land vehicles. Do you happen to know what the fourth vehicle is or was?
The fourth one that hasn't been, yes, it's called a light armored vehicle.
They're all called LAVs, but yeah, this must be a new iteration of a new model.
I can give you the exact remote weapon with a remote weapon system. I can perhaps ask Mr. McRoberts. He can give you, I'm sure, all the details.
That's okay. But we have the sense of what it was, and I think we can all sympathize with the military needs. If you have forces operational in a theater, you got to get the stuff now or yesterday, and so subject to what the additional witness may add, I take it that you're recommending that DND adopt an express procedure that's transparent, so everybody knows how to do it quickly if they have to do it quickly. Is that what you're proposing?
That is correct. We found that obviously they did not follow their own guide and procedures for acquisitions. That process presumes that things will be done sequentially, and obviously when there's urgent purchases, many of these things have to be done at the same time, or certain steps, or even bypassed. We recognize in the audit that is understandable in these situations, but that there should be developed a process for urgent purchases, identifying what are the key steps that have to be met.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Who gets to make that decision? Because I mean, the last thing the generals want are a bunch of accountants outside the door as they're struggling to get their jobs done. But I mean, who is it? The Minister of National Defense that would say, okay, we go to express bus number 2 on this one because we have to get the equipment within 45 days. Would it be the minister, or would it be?
I presume it would be officials within National Defense in conjunction with Public Works as well, because Public Works is, of course, the contracting authority for these very large purchases.
Okay. Was there some additional evidence from the additional witness?
Yes, just to clarify, the fourth vehicle, the one that there's been some problems with, is the creation of a new variant of the standard LAV-3. The intent was to remove the turret, which is quite heavy, with the 25mm gun on it, and then to replace that with a remote weapons system very much like that on the RG-31. This is a much lighter weapon system than the turret and 25mm gun. That would produce a reduction in weight that would permit putting more armor, anti-IED armor, on the LAV-3. It sounded like a simple idea, but it turned out to be a little more complicated to do than it sounds.
Plus, the men and women in these LAVs kind of like having that heavy gun on top when they need it. In any event, I'm not a soldier. Thank you very much for that. I want to turn to the Revenue Canada finance issue that came up at the briefings yesterday, and now I got to admit that 400 technical changes to the income tax will put most of us to sleep in about 5 minutes, but the Auditor General, you certainly point out that there are costs associated with the delay here, and there's been about 8 years of technical changes built up. And it's not just costs for the government, costs for the taxpayers and the taxpayers' accountants and the taxpayers' lawyers, but I think there are other indirect costs too, as are potential costs, and I called them, I guess they're just inefficiencies. As people struggle to get comfort letters and get letters written to say, you're not really going to tax me for this, are you, because you didn't tax my friend that way, and so it breeds uncertainty, and it breeds what I would call arbitrary decision-making within various tax offices. Would you agree with that, that those are potential outcomes, even though that it may not be happening in a real negative sense now?
I certainly think that there is a serious risk of uncertainty and confusion, and the fact that the delays are so long means that the agency may not be able to go back and reassess corporations who may have filed in a more aggressive fashion than the policy would permit, or vice versa. Corporations may be paying actually more taxes than they should be. So it is important that these amendments be made. I would also raise the issue that hasn't been brought up so far, that the Revenue Agency has guidance on its website, which is not up to date, that doesn't reflect changes. We give the example, for example, of scholarships for students where they are now completely tax exempt. Well, the guidance says that it's only $3,000. So they either need to, modify these things and bring them up to date, or I would say withdraw them, because taxpayers could be relying on incorrect information.
Thank you.
But the government, so the department has agreed with you on that?
That's
Have
correct.
they not? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Mr. Cramp, 6 minutes.
Thanks to all. Thanks for your diligence, and certainly as we participate in this evaluation of the apparatus of government, your thoughts are not only important, they're crucial. If I might, I've listened to a few of your reports now, and if I just might offer a quick little overview just for a second, and I'll use the analogy of a ground fire. We've all witnessed forest fires and raging infernos, and quite frankly, I think this whole group of reports are not that. But I will say that there are some brush fires. There are some issues that we have to deal with, and we not only could deal with, but we should deal with in order to not only solve some of the existing problems you've identified, but hopefully to prevent others from happening as well. So your efforts are extremely appreciated. Before I have a couple of quick penetrating questions, I would hope, but before I do that, I just can't hope my opposition members will allow me. It is rare when the Auditor General awards a quote gold star, and when I saw that, I honestly said, well, hey, all news isn't bad. So thank you very kindly for recognizing the efforts of management on the InfoHealth Way, and particularly when you contrast that with, of course, the provincial auditor's response on that was just literally damning. I'm pleased to see that. But it also opens up a very, very serious concern of mine on that. Because though we have a system that apparently is working very well, we're getting it together on the InfoWay, you state, however, having a system available does not mean health care professionals are using it. Well, what good is it having a system if people aren't going to use it effectively? Why aren't they using it effectively? Is it resources? Is it training? Is it regulatory approval? What is the problem?
Thank you, Chair. We were as well very pleased to see that the management of InfoWay was good and that our report was positive. We have suggested to InfoWay, recommended that they include in their indicators the percentage of systems that are actually being used. They haven't tracked that to date, believing that this was really a provincial responsibility to make sure that these systems were put in use. But we think that they should be much clearer in their performance indicators. They have agreed with that, and I am hopeful that they will start reporting that information soon.
Okay. On acquiring the military vehicles, good news, bad news. 3 of the projects, operational, the acquisitions were great. The other project, though, 2 years behind schedule and double the amount. Totally, obviously not acceptable. Can you give us the responses there as to why that happened, or do we ask our D&D officials under Public Works here to verify and justify that?
I think Mr. McRoberts mentioned part of the reason, and I'll ask him to elaborate, was it would really appear that the department underestimated the complexity of the project, but perhaps, Chair, I can ask Mr. McRoberts to elaborate upon that.
I'm pleased to do so, Mr. Chair. I think that, again, I think it's a question that you should ask the department. But if you look in terms of, if you like, complexity and certainty, there is a scale, if you like, that starts with the RG31, which was virtually, we went into the dealership and bought it off the showroom floor, through to the LAV3, which, as it turns out, was not as simple as just pop the turret off and pop an RWS on, but involved substantially more development work. And I think as you move from essentially military off-the-shelf acquisitions to design, build, and acquire, the risks go up, and particularly the cost and schedule risks.
Yeah, one brief question, if I have time then, Chair. Similar to my first question about obviously departments, can they meet the requirements? In evaluating the effectiveness of programs, the Auditor General says, but departments we audited said they were concerned about whether they can meet expanded requirements. Well, why can they not meet the expanded requirements? Is it due to manpower? Is it due to lack of expertise? Is it due to budget? Why can we not have the programs in place, but then have the people not deliver it? Why?
The program, as the committee knows, the policy has changed, and all direct program spending will have to be evaluated over a 5-year period starting in 2013. Currently, in the departments we looked at, the percentage of coverage is between, I think it's 7% and 13%. So none of the departments that we looked at is actually evaluating 20% each year, which is the minimum they would have to do. And they are very concerned about the lack of experienced evaluators to be able to do this. And we note as well that much of the evaluation work has been given to contractors. We think it's important that some of that expertise be brought in-house within government and that function be strengthened across government. There is still time, but they did mention a concern that within, 3 years, that they build up the capacity to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you. On the Info Healthway, like it's a significant budget, $1.5 billion to date. From the invoices and/or billing that has went through, have you been able to ascertain whether or not there's been value for money, and has there been complete transparency in the payment of invoices and for the purposes designated?
We saw that Infoway has a rigorous process of managing the projects that they fund. They ensure that there is a good strategic plan, that the projects meet their standards for compatibility. They have also, in a way, protected themselves. They agreed to fund 75% of the project, but any cost overruns are then assumed by the provinces. So it all, of course, depends upon the overall implementation within a particular province, and they are funding often projects, in specific hospitals or elsewhere. So much of the success of this project, in fact, will rely upon the provinces to bring these whole systems into operation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cramp. Mr. Plamondon, 6 minutes.
I'll be asking the questions, Mr. Chair. I'm going to focus my questions on Chapter 2, which refers to the selection of foreign workers. I would like to know, given the statements that are made in Chapter 1, where you say that to implement solutions, the government could possibly get into situations where it fosters measures that create unexpected problems, and that this could create inconsistency in the program. Next, in Chapter 2, you talk about the situation of foreign workers. Has the government put itself in a vulnerable position with regard to the Immigration Act in this regard? Is it currently in a situation where it is obliged to reimburse certain immigration candidates? And the measures that were implemented, have they been able to short-circuit the family immigration program? I'm going to respond to the first question, Mr. Chair, and then Mr. Flagel will respond to the other ones. We have not noted anything that runs counter to the Immigration Act. If we had, obviously we would have pointed that out in the report. So, and I will ask Mr. Flagel to confirm that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, we didn't find anything, or we didn't notice anything that violated the Act. But with regard to refunding application expenses to candidates, the way it works is that there are people who submit applications. They are qualified as non-eligible, and then they are reimbursed their funds between February 2008 and December 2008. There were some 300 eligible occupations, and that was reduced to 38 retroactively. So obviously there are people who submitted applications who will be qualified as ineligible thereafter. There are about 60,000 applications that were submitted during that 9-month period, and the department judged at that time that about 45,000 people would have to be reimbursed. Are these reimbursements limited to the official amounts for opening a file, or is there additional compensation for other expenses that were incurred? For example, to have their file processed by an advocate or by a lawyer or someone else. Mr. Chair, there is no additional compensation for those additional expenses. There are fees to review their file, and if the people are qualified as ineligible, those are the amounts that will be reimbursed. With regard to the accumulation or the backlog of files, there are some 1 million files that the government has in its entire immigration system. With the government spent over $300 million over the past 10 years on its computer system and to overhaul the system. Still today, the system is not yet ready, and there are requests for changes. I know that the Immigration Committee is looking at requests for additional appropriations for the computer system in the Immigration Department. Now, this has not helped the public servants in that department because these people are simply buried in paper. Has anyone provided you with information that leads you to believe that improvements will be made to the system? Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question that we raised in 2000. We had serious concerns about the way the files were being processed. The department responded, saying that it was on the point of developing a new case management system. Now, obviously, there were a great many problems with that problem. The costs have ballooned from $195 to $390 million over 10 years. And there were changes in the scope of the program problems with the management. Those were the reasons that were given to us. I think that we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The system should be implemented by June 2010 and extended to the entire network. But I think that the use of technology is key to help the department overcome the shortcomings in its system. I have another question concerning the contracts that go to DND, for which you noted problems. Would it be accurate to say that when these contracts are awarded throughout the tendering process, there were certain decisions that were unjustified? And could you explain to us the bidding or the competitive process? Because it would appear to say here that DND wanted to give precedence to sole supply processes, but that there was a misunderstanding between Public Works and DND. Public Works wanted to go through a competitive bidding process because they had several potential suppliers. Could you give us a bit more information on that, please? Yes. There were a couple of cases where there were difficulties awarding the contract. There was one case in which DND wanted to use a sole source a bidding process. Public Works, though, wanted it to be a competitive bidding process. But in the end, after the process was gone through, it was the tender was awarded to the original candidate. It was partly a question of the timeline for the deliverables. The other bidders were not able to meet that deadline, and it was not clear in the original call for tenders that the deadline was that critical. And it was not until the end of the process that the other suppliers realized that they would not be able to meet these requirements. So in our opinion, this was a massive waste of time. Public Works and DND should have better targeted and more clearly defined the requirements and the timeline and the deadline at the outset. Aside from that, I believe that the two contracts which went through a competitive bidding process were done properly. There was another bidding process, one that is undergoing a delay, in which DND did not provide all the information to Treasury Board Secretariat concerning the scope of the project. The cost for the vehicles alone was some $55 million, and the total project was double that amount. And they did not indicate the scope of this project, of the overall project, when they made their request for funding. Thank you, Ms. Fye.
Thank you. Thank you, witnesses, again, for being here. I think one of the I go, Madam Fraser, to your number 2 in your original statement, because I say that only because I think it's so important. The issues in this report are typical of challenges facing the government today. And this is the important part. Our findings underscore the importance of thinking through the implementation, the challenges when policies and programs are developed or changed. I think that really outlines what the purpose of your audit is. We recognize through this audit there are some things to change. When I read through the audit, I didn't see where anybody was saying no. I don't think these are things we should be doing. That isn't what we heard. What we have found is that many of these situations have been ongoing for 30 or 40 years, some of them. And so I want to just say to the general public that I think as a government, regardless of who it is, that we need to be professional in all aspects, and that when we see weaknesses within our organization, recognizing the size of government, that we need to take steps. And what we've found in this report, from my take anyway, is that we have aspects that are moving quicker than others. And I guess that's likely part of what life is, unfortunately, or fortunately. I'm just wondering, when you do these reports, though, and I think there were some that may have been thinking, well, there's going to be something huge come out of it. We've been doing a lot in 4 years, quite honestly. Would you find any major irregularities through this audit? Is that what would show up? Doing an audit like this within a particular department, would it have showed up if there was some major irregularity?
I would like to think that if there was a major irregularity, it would have been discovered by the audit. That is certainly not the case in these audits. These are really, I think many of our recommendations are, as you mentioned, trying to improve management processes, encouraging government officials to do more analysis. As Mr. Flagel mentioned, we did see an example of good analysis that was done that identified risks and possible changes, but we see other decisions that are made, that analysis is not there, where the strategies going forward are not in place. And we think that that is important to ensure that the programs are being as effective as they can be.
Maybe I'll just leave it at that, because I do want to go on, because I think one of the things that we find in procurement, we've had a number of procurements and you've talked about it, and I may come back to the national defense one if I have time, but there have not been irregularities of major issues. That's what we're finding. Under public safety, Canada, and my understanding, and when I read this, is that it has not been put in place. Now, I'm thinking that in 2006, actually, I think the government of the day, what we did was that we put monies forward to start to implement a large-scale or a federal emergency response plan, which I would understand has not been in place before. Would that be correct?
Well, the Federal Emergency Response Plan at this point is still not approved.
Right.
And I believe I can ask Ms. Lochuk, but my understanding is that the department started to work on this soon after its creation.
Yes.
The Act may have been modified, but there was a previous Act. But Ms. Lochuk perhaps could confirm.
So I think what I'm seeing is that, just not because I only got 5 minutes, and that's sort of his prerogative. But I'm sort of thinking that what I understand the National Emergency Program, it's not just a National Emergency Program. It involves, because I've been involved municipally before, not only involves the federal government, it involves a coordination of all the provincial organizations and provinces and territories. And then, quite honestly, it comes back down because we've had that opportunity municipally wise to have input into it, so that when a national emergency happens, every time it affects the local people. Every time it affects the provincial people. So I don't want it, I just don't want it to be left that, well, nothing is happening. I'm just wondering if you could help us with the stage of where it's at, recognizing the complexity of bringing together a full national emergency plan, because we've had a couple of pilot projects, unfortunately, like the floods in Manitoba, where you continually, when you go out after these things, you do lessons learned. And I know that there have been lessons learned, so I'm just wondering if you can help us with the status, if you know where that might be in terms of bringing it to a final end.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask Ms. Lochuk to respond.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair. I believe that we are talking, though, about two things. When we talk about the national plans, you're talking mainly about how the federal government is working with the provinces and territories and municipalities. That's something that we didn't particularly address in this audit. We stayed at the federal level, and our interest was then how are all the different departments working together when they have to start to coordinate their activities, when they have to be clear on what their different roles and responsibilities are going to be and who's in charge. That's moving forward in some cases, as you've seen in the report, but there are pockets, there are areas where progress has been very slow. For example, in cybersecurity or critical infrastructure, some things are not moving along as quickly as we had hoped they might be.
Mr. Christopherson, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Six minutes?
Yeah.
Yep.
Got a bonus today, Mr.
Yeah, no kidding. A bonus round. And I just, in a very friendly manner, to say to my friend Mr. Cramp that while he's busy bragging about their single gold star, you get your gold star, but keep in mind a broken clock is right twice a day too. So, if I can, I'd like to turn to Chapter 7. Just on the cybersecurity, actually, you speak here to the lack of a strategy, and that there was a commitment made originally in 2004, the national security policy. So there's lots of blame to go around to both the two largest parties. My question. It seems to me, and I've been racking my brain before my turn to speak, trying to remember which country it was, but I can't. The best I can come up with is Estonia, but I don't think it is. There was a country recently that was the focus of a serious cyber attack that was reported around the world. Anybody remember what country that was?
I think it was Australia.
It was Australia, anyway. The point is that we've seen some examples of it, and I'm no expert in this field, but certainly I don't think one needs to be to understand the threat to our energy grid systems, our defense systems, our intelligence systems, all the things that we need to work. Which led me to one side question. Does DND have a separate, secure system standalone so that if we were under a cyber attack and everything else went down, do they have sort of standalone, or are they part of a network-wide threat?
This is based more on just general background, but yes, they do have an ability, at least limited ability, to stand alone. They have separate power generation for emergencies. They have their own communication systems, military communication systems that are not entirely network dependent. So they do have some capability to function.
I've read that, and I mentioned the power grid, that there are entities in the world that are either trying to get the ability or have it, that if they concentrated that they could literally shut down the energy system. Any sense of how close we are to that kind of a real threat as a result of not having the security system that we need in place?
Chair, we certainly can't respond to that. I don't even know if a department actually could respond to that.
Well, that's even scarier.
Presume that those kinds of assessments would be classified information.
Yeah.
But certainly, there is a real need to have this cybersecurity strategy worked out. And as we mentioned in the report, there has been very little progress made on what is a really key element of the overall strategy.
Were you given any answers as to why that carry some weight with you?
Not really. I mean, we do note in the report that there are issues with resources in the department, very high vacancy rates, a very significant movement of people. I think we say something like 70%
in some cases, yes.
Wow.
that have moved. So there is a lot of turnover and movement, which of course makes things difficult.
Yeah, we've run into that in a number of
But
audits.
as to why that is occurring, that would be something that would have to be reviewed with the department.
Okay, thank you for that. And then in the same chapter, page 19, the first responder and the voice communications. And again, like Mr. Shipley, I hearken back to my city council days, and I can remember even back then, which is getting further back every day, this issue was real. And I know in the last few years, my hometown, Hamilton, spent millions of dollars just to make sure that within our city and within the general region they could communicate. But whether or not they have the ability to communicate on a larger scale, interact provincially, federally, and with other municipal entities, I don't know. It sounds to me like your concern is that may or may not be there. And if I recall, also yesterday, Auditor General, I think you said that one of the things the government could have done was provided a little assistance as an incentive, given the fiscal pressures that municipalities are under.
Absolutely. This is an area where we would have expected much more to have been done. We mentioned that, the 2004 policy called for this. Certainly, I think this issue became very real for people when we saw what happened on September 11th, when there was that lack of ability to communicate between the first responders. And this is an area where we would have, I think it's reasonable to have expected that there would have been more work done on common standards that would have been agreed to with the provinces and the municipalities. And given the fact that the department didn't spend a third of its budget in the last 2 years, there certainly were resources that could have been made available to encourage this project and move it along.
Yeah, and again, from provincial experience, I know that the pressures that provincial capitals are under to try to come to grips with this, and the fact that they're not connected at this late date is very, very disconcerting. In the moments that I have left, if I could return to Chapter 6 and the First Nations environmental protection, their lands rather. Paragraph 6.92, the First Nations Land Management Act, FNLMA, is intended to enable First Nations to make timely business administrative decisions. So as I understand this, the intent is to download responsibility from the feds to the First Nations to make their own decisions, but there isn't the opportunity to get the training that they need in order to assume those very responsibilities and make the right decisions. And number one, is that correct? And secondly, could you just expand on that a little? What should be happening exactly that isn't?
That is essentially correct. There are 4 programs that are in place that would allow First Nations to assume more responsibility over their management of land and resources. So they would not be totally subject to the Indian Act, as is currently the case. Under the Indian Act, it is the federal government that in fact manages land resources, so it would have to approve leases, even basic things that would be necessary for economic development. So for those First Nations that are judged able to assume that responsibility, they would apply to go under one of these programs and would receive the necessary training. But as we mentioned in the report, access to these programs is limited, and the Department has indicated it is again a question of funding.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Mr. Weston, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Fraser, you made some complimentary remarks about the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, but despite Jason Kenney's solid Jesuit training, he didn't get a gold star. So I would like to explore how we can get there. Certainly, this has got to be one of the most bracing, exciting, and complex elements of Canadian nation building. Immigration, the processing of applicants from around the world. There's no limit on the number of people who can apply on any given day, whether as foreign skilled workers or temporary foreign workers or in any of the other categories. It's an exercise of gargantuan proportions. The numbers that you reflected in your report are absolutely massive. One of those numbers is a good number, even though you said there's some 600,000 applications in the system. That represents a 30% decline from where we were as a couple of years ago, as I understand it.
If I could just clarify, as I mentioned, the process or the number of job categories was modified and decreased from 300 and something to 38. That was announced in late 2008, effective February 2008. So there was a cutoff point at February 2008. At that point, the backlog was around 600,000. That inventory, pre-February 2008, has been reduced by about 30%, but it is because there was no processing of applications received from February 2008 well into 2009, December of 2008, which means that there was another backlog created under the new system. So in fact, the actual reduction, if you take the whole program together, the two together, is about 5%, not 30%.
All right. I understood the skilled worker backlog had fallen by 30%, but given what you're saying, it's...
I think those numbers are quoted, but the quotations have to be read very carefully because we're talking about the inventory as at February 2008. The department itself, I think, just released a report where they themselves report that the overall backlog was reduced by about 5%.
Well, we all have stories in this room, I'm sure, relating to immigration. I lived overseas as an international lawyer, and I saw people longing to come to our shores and who were frustrated by the complicated nature of a process. It's been simplified to some extent by reducing the number of categories. And based on the tenor of your recommendations, it seems that we're moving in the right direction in terms of reducing backlogs by saying to the world there's now only 38 instead of 351 categories. Isn't that a good sign of leadership from an accountability perspective, from a managing of people's expectations perspective?
Well, I think that as we mentioned in the report, there has to be an assessment done as to whether that reduction is having the desired effect. It is still very early to assess that, but what we can see in the first few months of this is that the number of applications have not dropped significantly, and that there are not a lot of refusals because they don't meet one of those 38 categories. The department has indicated they want to do the processing of this under this new program in 6 to 12 months, and so it will be important for them to continue to track what the processing time, the number of applications that are being made, and are they able to meet that, and if not, obviously to take other measures to try to address the issue.
Okay, so there's some engagement and the department's listening.
Yes.
Let's move to foreign credentials. That's always been one of the most contentious things. People rue the fact sometimes they come to our great country and then can't use their credentials. Paragraph 2.135 of your report, you say preliminary findings indicate the program is consistent with federal priorities and has contributed to a greater understanding and awareness of foreign credential recognitions issues among stakeholders. That's the new program for foreign credentials recognition that was brought in under this Conservative government, and it sounds like it's preliminary, too early to make a strong assessment, but it's going in the right direction.
Absolutely. This is a positive finding in the report. Obviously, the recognition of credentials is largely provincial jurisdiction, so the role of the federal government is relatively limited. But they have put together this initiative and created a new organization to provide better information to foreign applicants about the requirements within Canada, and as well to work with the provinces to try to increase the recognition of foreign credentials.
And now I'm sure I speak on behalf of all my colleagues, fellow members of Parliament, that one of the biggest things we deal with is people trying to get their work permits or their LMOs, and you comment quite extensively on this. You said that HRSDC, which is responsible for the labor market opinions, has implemented a number of initiatives aimed at improving the administration of labor market opinions. That's 2.98. This I find really interesting. You talked about a quality assurance framework necessary. You said that there were some improvements, electronic mailboxes set up, and the department is listening to its shortfalls, which it concedes. There was nothing in the report that suggested you'd actually talk to the customers, that is, the employers who are trying to bring people in. And I know there's been consternation among some employers about the whole LMO process.
John?
Chair, I would say that in the course of the audit, the team did speak to employers, and I can ask Mr. Flagel to expand upon that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we actually met with employers from Alberta, BC, Ontario, so that was a very important. We don't really report on this, but we really listened to what they had to say, and so that was part of the audit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weston. Ms. Crombie, 6 minutes.
Pick up on Chapter 2, and I'll finish off some of Mr. Weston's thoughts. So if we're limiting the criteria of who can apply, since we've reduced the number of eligible categories from 351 to 38, will we be meeting our future labor market needs, in your opinion?
We don't raise an issue about that aspect particularly. I mean, we did see that there was little analysis as to the choice of the 38, but in a way, again, it's a policy decision. Where we do raise some issues, though, is that the people coming into the country, the programs under which they're coming, there has been a significant shift, and the provincial nominee programs are becoming more and more important. Were the trends to continue, provincial nominee programs would be the single largest source of skilled workers coming into the country. The federal government has very little information or effectively any kind of oversight over the choices and the categories under which the provinces are bringing people in. They essentially accept the nominees from the provinces. And as we note in the report, if the trend were to continue, the federal skilled worker program, which is around 68,000, 70,000, which was about 100,000 5 years ago, could drop to under 20,000 by 2012. So it raises questions about, is this what is the desired effect? We believe there should be evaluations done of these programs, and are they meeting the labor needs of the country?
And we know that immigration is so critical to our growth. You also referenced the fact that there's a 63-month delay in processing. So why wouldn't individuals look to other countries to immigrate where their processing is much simpler and faster and easier, frankly, such as the UK or Australia? We are, after all, competing for the best and brightest minds in the world.
Absolutely. That is one of the, I'm sure, one of the reasons why the government introduced a smaller number of job categories that would qualify in order to try to speed up processing. They have indicated they would like processing to occur within 6 to 12 months, which is certainly far more reasonable than 5 years.
Is it achievable?
As we say, we have encouraged the department to track the number of applications and the processing times. It's still very early under that new job category, those new job categories. So I think only time will tell.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears again and go back to Chapter 7, Emergency Management, Public Safety. What concrete steps need to be taken to ensure that we have a coordinated federal action plan in the event of another, a newer emergency of national significance?
Well, we think one critical element is to have approval of the federal emergency response plan, that set out clearly the roles and responsibilities of the various departments, in particular Public Safety Canada. So it has the authority, if you will, should there be a case of a national emergency.
And once again, can we speculate why this plan has not been approved after 4 years?
We don't have an answer for that, Chair. You would really have to ask the department.
Granted. All right. In 2008 and 2009, the government allocated $58.5 million for emergency management, but only spent 2/3 of it. So where did the money go, and how was it used?
Well, the money would have been used for the activities within the department. Any monies that, of course, were not spent would have gone back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
So clearly there was a missed opportunity to spend money
as we note, there
on
are
needy programs, on programs that had been allocated, budgeted.
Well, as we note in the report, there is a very high vacancy rate
I was going to go there
of
next.
Personnel, and that, of course, we would think would be one of the factors why many of the plans and issues that we would have expected to have been further along are not.
And so you reference very high turnover rate, and it's very concerning. 71% at Public Safety Canada, 56% of senior managers had only been in their positions for 18 months. So why is the turnover so high, and how would that impact emergency preparedness?
As to the reasons, again, that would have to be discussed with the department. As to why that is occurring, if they have done the analysis, we didn't go into that kind of detailed work on that area. But clearly turnover like that will have an effect upon the ability of the department to produce the plans, do the work that is expected of them.
You said also that over 50% of the budget allocated to national emergency response exercises were designed to share lessons learned, best practices, etc., but they'd been shelved in each of the past 3 years. So what was lost, and why did that happen?
I'll ask Ms. Lochuk, Chair, to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair. I believe that you're referring to paragraph 737, where they're talking about the exercises. What we found that while there were some exercises conducted, they were not able to get as many exercises underway as they had initially hoped to do. There were issues regarding getting all the players together, or even getting the plans together. Again, with the lack of resources, with the lack of staff to plan forward for these exercises, it just didn't happen. Now, why that is exactly, again, you'd have to go into details with the department as to what it was that they were planning for.
Thank you, Ms. Crombie. Mr. Young, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the foreign workers, the skilled worker program, I think, has been, however imperfect, a significant success, and the wait times have gone down from, my understanding, 6 years down to about 6 months. As well, this government has welcomed a record number of immigrants to Canada in history. But for skilled workers, isn't the starting position the labor market surveys and labor market shortages in the provinces? Because we know that every province has labor market shortages and there are clear needs. So I'm pleased to see that the improvements that you're recommending have been accepted by CIC to iron out to clarify responsibilities and to conduct structural assessments of the genuineness of both employers and jobs offered. But I have a question, and I understand it would be great information to have, the job, and can the employer afford to pay, and do they have an apartment for the person to stay, etc., and to be able to quantify that. And the department agrees to work on it. But my concern is it sounds like the Government of Canada would be acting like a giant job verification agency. Not quite a job placement agency, but a job verification agency. It would be very, very labor intensive. I'm wondering how many people you'd have to hire to verify over 50,000 jobs a year, to call the employers or contact them and try and verify. They maybe ask for financial statements, or you'd have to set up a bureaucracy or beef up the bureaucracy considerably to do so. So I'm wondering, in addition to that, how reliable would the information be? For example, if you had someone who ran a kitchen in a hotel and they got a call from CIC and they said, you had a job application from this person in Africa that wants to be a chef, and they'd say yes, and they'd fill out all the boxes and get back to running their kitchen. But how reliable would that information be? In fact, economic conditions could change or the hotel could close and the person would come here. Wouldn't it be more reliable, or at least as reliable, for the person just to know that there is a labor shortage and that skill set in that area, that province at that time, and that there are a number of jobs they could go to?
Chair, I'll ask perhaps Mr. Flagel to help me on this, but we are certainly not proposing that the federal government validate every single job. This would have to be done on a risk basis when there are situations that would appear suspicious or doubtful, that there be some follow-up of it. Currently, that is not done. There is confusion as well about who actually has responsibility in this area, so there needs to be clarification given. On the question of coming for a job within an area, my understanding is that under current regulations, the person can only go to that individual that has applied, that they do not have the freedom to move around. I think there may be proposals to change that, but currently, if that job should turn out not to be genuine, the person's kind of stuck, or could be subjected to perhaps difficult situation, depending upon that. And the other issue is, that we mentioned a bit earlier, is that we have to ensure the integrity of the program and that people don't create jobs that may not be valid in order to process family members or others that would take much longer under the Family Reunification Program.
Emergency Management Act, my understanding is that it was revised in 2007 and there was an interim plan in place. Now, I would assume that that plan had outlined a federal role, and I'm wondering how the fact that it says interim on the front of the plan would prevent it from being carried out or implemented effectively.
Well, the fact that I think it is what is known as kind of interim, but it is really a draft plan. It has never been approved by government.
But there is a plan there, so I'm just wondering, if it's not approved by government, would that prevent it from being implemented in an emergency?
Well, I think that people are using it as if it had been approved, but it's only really by approving it that the department then gets, if you will, the authority. Each department reports to its minister. One department cannot tell another department what to do unless there is some policy or plan in place, and that's why the approval of this is really important.
Thank you. Do you have a little more time, Chair?
One more minute.
Thank you, Madam Fraser. With regards to the income tax acts, I'm sure that No one would disagree that taxpayers have a right to know how much tax they owe so they can determine and plan their lives and their business. And having run my own business for many years, I can sympathize with that. In fact, every year I think this is the year that I don't have to hire an accountant to do my taxes. And every year I say, no, I better not this year. And you want to check because you're always afraid you missed one deduction or that you're going to pay too much and you're going to treat yourself unfairly. So you end up paying accountants. It's confusing. But with regards to the changes that you wanted to see, the technical amendments, it's important to note, I think, that they were introduced in November 2006, and your report says that in the footnote, and again in 2007, and I'm quite sure they will be introduced to Parliament again when the parliamentary calendar allows. When that happens, will that solve the problems, in your view, that you identified in your audit?
What I understand is that the bill that was introduced contained about 150 amendments, but there are at least 250 more that have not been presented publicly and for which proposed legislation has not been prepared. And we were told by the departments that they want this initial bill. They've taken a process where the initial bill goes through and then they do the others. So there is quite a catch-up to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young. Thank you, Ms. Fraser. That concludes the first and second round, and I'm going to ask Ms. Fraser or Mr. Vaughan. We've been easy on Mr. Vaughan this afternoon. Whether either of them have any closing or concluding remarks.
Well, Chair, I would just thank the committee for their interest in the report, and we look forward to future hearings on specific chapters.
Mr. Vaughan.
Thank you, sir.
Well. As you've heard in the motion, Mr. Fraser, we have picked at least 4 of the chapters that we will be holding hearings on, inviting the accounting officer of the respective departments, and that will take place starting in December, and we may be going beyond 4, so we'll certainly be following up the work of yourself and your office. So thank you very much. Now, the next item of business, I believe Madame Fay has a motion to present. Is that what you want to do that today, Madame Fay?
We still have time to deal with this. I think everyone has received the notice of motion, and just for the committee, I will read it. So in the matter of the contract awarded to Brookfield Global Relocation Services in 2009 as part of the Integrated Relocation Program, a program whose contracts were reviewed by the Auditor General and found to contain inaccuracies and not to be tendered in a fair and equitable manner, as stated in a 2006 report, which was supported by the Standing Committee on Public Accounts and welcomed by the Minister of Public Works and Government Services. That the committee asked the Auditor General to conduct an audit of the Integrated Relocation Program as of April 1999, including the tendering and awarding of the 2009 contract, and to present her findings to Parliament. That is the wording of the motion. Mr. Chair, I think that there are a number of cases now that have been raised by the Auditor General where she makes us aware that the rationale is not always presented in the different files with regard to contracting. These contracts are often incomplete, with elements missing and subject to conflict of interest. In 2006, the Auditor General concluded in her report that the bidding process with regard to the relocation program was the object of numerous irregularities. On August 18, 2009, the bid was awarded for $250 over 5 years, so that is a considerable amount. At the end of the competitive bidding process, apparently there was only one bidder. That is the company that has the program since '99. So in the past, the officials were in an apparent appearance of conflict of interest, for example, travels to West Indies, trips to Alaska, and subsidized golf games. So the process is being criticized, the bidding process, so the department was able to answer the industry's questions, which suspected them of giving their real estate contracts to some people who were employed by them. So I'm tabling this motion and I think it's because the committee, in order to complete the cycle, because we had an in-camera session in June, I think that in order to complete the process, I think we should ask the Auditor General to review this contract and to report to Parliament thereon.
I'll entertain 8 interventions up to a minute each, and then we'll go back to Madam Fye and put the question. But before I do that, I just want to point out that hopefully no one's under the illusion that a motion like this is not binding on the Auditor General. This is just a motion from the committee, and she may or may not accept it, and she's got her own risk methodologies that determines whether or not she would actually conduct an audit of this nature. However, okay, Mr. Lee, very quickly, 1 minute, and then we'll go to Ms. Crombie.
Okay, I intend to support the motion, and the reason is this relocation contract had already caught the attention of the Auditor General previously, for reasons Ms. Fye referred to. But in the rollout of the contract, new one, which went to Brookfield Properties, I think it was Brookfield Properties, and it was awarded to Brookfield, a sister corporation. The deadlines for the tender, the date for decision on the successful bidder, the date of the commencement of the contract under the award, including the spin-up time of a couple of months, were, to my understanding, so compressed into like a month for such a huge contract, one of the largest contracts of its kind in North America. It's a massive, massive contract. It's hard to understand how anybody could bid and be ready to deliver on the project, because you had to open offices right across the country, and you only had 2 or 3 weeks to do it, and with the window of time that the department offered. So I think there are still questions about this, big questions about how the department ended up boxing itself in again, and I want to get those answers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. Ms. Crombie, 1 minute, please.
Well, I concur. We reviewed this matter in June. Well, actually, independently of each other, we hadn't spoken. Just prior to the contract being tendered to Brookfield Royal LePage, and we had some concerns with it back in June, and nothing was done. The contract was tendered, but that does not negate the fact that it's a highly complex contract. There were very tight deadlines and timelines put in place in the and there is a significant realistic fear that the process favored only one bidder, and lo and behold, that's all we had. So there has to be legitimate concern that there wasn't a fair and open process. We look at how limiting the bidding process was. Huge startup costs, new technology, hiring of training of staff, opening up offices. It just limited the scope, and we have to better understand what had happened. This is a company that has won the same contract 4 times in a row, back in 1998, 2002, 2004, and yet again in 2009. So, it just doesn't seem right. I think we should look at it a little more closely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crombie. Mr. Saxton, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I admire the diligence and tenacity of Madame Fye in proposing this. However, unfortunately, I will not be able to support it. On June the 18th, the committee had an in-camera session with the departmental officials, and the committee concluded that it was satisfied with the department's actions. Upon a motion by my colleague David Christofferson, we adjourned. I'll state that the committee do now conclude its study of the procurement process for the integrated relocation program in relation to the committee's study of Chapter 5, relocating members of the Canadian Forces, etc. The committee's June 18th minutes state that this has basically been put to bed. And furthermore, an independent third-party fairness monitor came out with this report, which I would like to table before the committee, Mr. Chair. And they said that, and I quote, the quote was conducted in a fair, open, competitive, and transparent manner. And this committee thoroughly examined the AG's report of November 2006 We made a report with recommendations. The department came here in June and assured us that it had fully implemented all of the recommendations as well as those of the Auditor General. And the Fairness Monitor report concluded that this was a fair process. So I think we've had enough of this particular report, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cramp, up to a minute.
We all want what is right, but where do we go and when do we stop? This was before this committee before. This same issue was before Government Operations and Estimates, and I sat on it. We reviewed it. We reviewed it again for the second time on June the 18th when we had the senior people in, Daphne Meredith and that, witnesses from the thing. And whether we agree or whether we don't, no convincing evidence was put forward in those different sets of hearings that cause us reason to believe that we have to continue on and on. Where do we go? How many times do we go back and address the same issue? If there is conclusive evidence, and or not even conclusive, but serious evidence that any member of this committee wants to bring forward that is going to lead us to rethink the issue other than that's constructive, that's there, that's a smoking gun, then by all means, let's go back and do it. No difficulty. But just because, well, we should go back because we weren't satisfied, that's not good enough. We're going to be doing that on every issue that we deal with, where we have. So I say, though I understand, I go back to the envoy situation, the Aid LePage, the on and on. We can go endlessly on these types of issues. Where do we stop? Where do we go? We've made a decision. It's already been, I said before the various committees of this House 3 times now to take it back again, if it's the will of the committee. But I honestly. It might not be 100% satisfactory to everybody, but where do we draw the line? We have all kinds of other responsibilities to do as well. So does the Auditor General.
Thanks, Chair. And just to pick up on Mr. Cramp's concerns, he makes valid points. But I do think there's a couple of things to put in the mix of our consideration. Number one, that one of the reasons we concluded, not just because at that point our findings were relatively inconclusive, but that the bidding process was underway, and we really were very, very sensitive to getting involved in an ongoing procedure. So we had reviewed up to that point, but we were very cognizant that, hey, this thing's underway right now, we ought to be careful. Number two, if memory serves me right, we were assured by department officials that there would be more than one bidder. And yet, here we are, we ended up with just one. And my last point is, just to add a little comfort level, it's really not going to be our decision as to whether go on. This will go to the Auditor General. She will obviously review what we've done to date, and if she determines that we've taken this as far as an auditing process or an accountability process requires, then she will say no. If she agrees that there's something new or something further, then she'll make that decision. But our decision today is, do we want to place it in front of her for that review and consideration? And in light of the issues that are on the table, I'm comfortable supporting this today.
Okay, then we'll come back to no other speakers. We'll come back to you, Madame Five, for the last minute. Then we'll put
I think that my colleagues have set out all the arguments. I think that my conservative colleagues are throwing in the towel too quickly in this regard. I think everything's been said, and I think that we can call the vote.
Motion reads, there's a preamble, but I'm just going to read the motion, that the committee asks the Auditor General to conduct an audit of the Integrated Relocation IRP program as of April 1999, including the tendering and awarding of the 2009 contract, and to present her findings to Parliament. All in favour of that motion, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1 minute.
1 minute, Mr. President. 1 minute. The motion reads from s'agissant, the first paragraph is in the motion as well. It's just there was a typo. It was supposed to be a small letter instead of a big Q in French.
First paragraph was a preamble, yeah.
Yeah, well, it goes together, or else.
Okay, well,
yeah.
we are voting on the whole thing.
Okay,
There's no question about that. Okay, those contrary-minded. Contrary-minded is the motion?
Against.
Contrary-minded.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's why you pay me the big bucks. I see. That's anyway. No, I'm prepared to support the motion. And I'll give you the reasons. The auditor, as I said in my opening remarks, the auditor will make her own assessment on this thing, and I'm under no delusion that she will do this audit on the strengths of this audit. I have a concern about the size of the contract, and she will have a look at it, and she has her own risk methodology, and if she thinks, her office thinks that it warrants further investigation, then she will do it. And I'm thoroughly convinced that if she thinks that it does not warrant further investigation, she will not. So I will support the motion.
So the motion is adopted.
Motion is adopted. Yeah. Okay. Any other further business? If not, the bells are ringing, and we will adjourn. And we will see you on Monday, the 16th of November.